In many ways, the 4th of July, Independence Day, is the ultimate American holiday. It is a time when we celebrate the freedoms we share as citizens of this country. It is a time when we remember what we enjoy: freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the right to petition. And in many ways, what undergirds it all is the freedom we enjoy to choose our own leaders by exercising our right to vote. Elections for local and state offices are held on a regular basis in every town and city across the land. But the election that stirs up the most interest and usually the greatest turnout at polling stations is when we elect a president every 4 years. And even though the next presidential election is still over a year away, we are already heavily into the campaign season. Right at the moment, there are 19 announced candidates. 5 Democrats and 14 Republicans, the largest Republican field, I'm told, since 1952. Although I haven't heard the news this morning, who knows, maybe somebody could have declared overnight. 2 women, 17 men, mostly white, though there are at least a couple of Hispanics, 1 candidate who is Indian American, and a black man. Most have held elective office before or do so currently, but not all of them. Politically, they range from a socialist to several who are from the so-called Tea Party wing of the Republicans, and everything in between. They come from large states and small, east, west, north, south. They have a variety of religious backgrounds and represent several professions and occupations. But one thing they all have in common: each and every one of them feels that she or he has what it takes to lead our nation. Each and every one of them, all 19, believe that they could do the best job as President of the United States. Public opinion polls indicate that all of the candidates have some people who support their candidacy, but not one of them appears to be a shoo-in come November 2016. And quite frankly, at this point, why should they? American voters, you and I, have months to make up our minds about which candidate to choose to represent which party, and even longer to consider one's final choice. How we make those choices varies from voter to voter. Some choose based strictly on a candidate's position on one or another issue. Where does he or she stand on abortion, gun control, immigration? Single-issue voters, such people are often called. Of course, when you've got 14 folks to choose from, as Republicans currently do, it may take more than one issue to sort it all out. Other voters look at things like how a candidate speaks and presents him or herself. What has been his or her past experience? What kind of record does a particular candidate have? Have they exhibited leadership qualities in past situations? In the end, it can all be quite a task, quite an undertaking, if we are at all serious about exercising our franchise. Don't worry, I am not here to recommend one candidate or another. Not only is that a violation of the separation of church and state and illegal in the eyes of the IRS, It also would serve no real purpose. I have no interest in telling you who to vote for, not at all. Nor am I here to say that God stands behind a particular party. I love the bumper sticker that reads, "God is not a Republican, nor a Democrat." But that said, I really do believe your values as a person of faith, whatever those values may be, should help to inform your own decision when you vote. Your values, not mine, yours. Your faith, not mine, yours. Your decision. Presidents, of course, are not kings, for kings are not elected. But our story from 2 Samuel provides an interesting example of how one ancient king gained power. And in that story, we learn what those ancient Israelites deemed to be an essential set of qualities for one in such a leadership position. A bit of background may be helpful. After the Israelites left slavery in Egypt and made their way through the wilderness, they eventually ended up in what they believed to be the Promised Land, the place their ancestors had come from. Divided into 12 loosely confederated tribes, they took control of the land, usually by force, sometimes driving out those who already lived there, at other times peacefully coexisting with them. Eventually and essentially, each tribe lived on its own, though they shared a common belief in one God who was known as Yahweh. They also shared a common code of conduct, undergirded by what we call the Ten Commandments. The tribes would act independently of each other unless there was an external threat, and then they would band together to fight back the invaders. Those joint efforts were coordinated by men, and notably one woman named Deborah, who came to be known as judges. The judges exercised a measure of authority over the Israelites, though usually that authority was militaristic in nature and only occasionally judicial, despite the name judge. The Israelites at first had no formal king, in part because they believed God was their king. But as those outside threats increased, as war often became a way of life, the Israelites wanted a flesh and blood king, a king of their own, like other nations, they said. And so the very last of the judges, a man named Samuel, so the biblical story goes, was authorized by God to anoint a king. And that first king was a man named Saul. Saul may very well have suffered from what today we would call mental illness. Whatever the case, Saul proved to be rather arbitrary in his rule, and at times extremely ineffective. Indeed, when it came to military leadership, Saul's victories were due to the efforts of his most successful general, a man named David. David, as most folks know, started life as a lowly shepherd, literally. He was the youngest of 8 sons, and originally thought to be a weakling at best. When Saul's kingship started to falter, God authorized Samuel to secretly choose and anoint a new king, and his choice had been David. So David, the secretly anointed king, went to work for Saul and rose in power and stature despite his humble beginnings. David's story is long and complicated, but eventually, after Saul's death by sword, he killed himself, David is acclaimed king. First by the southern tribes, 2 of the 12, and eventually, in today's reading that Paul shared with us earlier, he is acclaimed king by all 12 of the tribes. The elders of the tribes that had not yet affiliated with David approach him at a place called Hebron. There, their spokesperson addresses David. "We are your flesh and bone," he says. "We are all connected, all 12 tribes, if not by biology, then by custom and tradition, and by our common belief in one God. While Saul was king over us, it was you, David, who led out Israel and led us in. You were our military leader. You were our general. You led our troops. It was under you that we had success. The Lord said to you, David, it is you, David, who shall be shepherd of my people Israel. You who shall be ruler over them." And right then and there, the tribes make a covenant, a pact with David. He will be their leader, their king, and they will be his people. In that approach to David, we see what for those ancient Israelites was probably the most important element in their job description for a king. David, they affirm, David shall be their shepherd. This is not a reference to the fact that he was once literally a keeper of sheep. Rather, it points to how they wish to be led. They want a leader who is like a good shepherd, one who cares for his sheep and puts their needs ahead of his own, one who helps them find the green pastures of prosperity and guides them safely along the rocky cliffs of life, one who will help them stay together as a flock, one who will keep them safe when predators approach, one who will even go so far as to lay down life itself in defense of his sheep. Those were the characteristics of a good shepherd in their day, and those were the characteristics they wanted their king to have. And in many ways, David did indeed live up to their expectations. It was only when he let things like greed or lust or ambition get in his way that he failed. Failed God, failed the people, and ultimately, of course, failed himself. But as long as David remembered the covenant he had made with the elders, as long as he remembered his oath of office, so to speak, as long as he put his subjects first, as long as he was a good shepherd, there was peace and prosperity and safety for all. Unlike the 12 tribes of Israel, we as Americans are not of one flesh and one blood, literally or figuratively. And yes, we elect presidents and not kings. But I can't help but wonder if there might be something in this story of an ancient monarch and his nation that can inform us as individuals when it comes to selecting who we want to lead us in the years ahead. You might ask yourself, though you certainly don't have to, and I am not thinking of any candidate in particular, you might ask yourself, would he or she make a good shepherd? I leave it for you to decide. Amen. And now, sisters and brothers, as you leave this place and go to exercise all the freedoms that we have been granted, might you remember the importance of responsibility, of taking seriously those freedoms and what they afford you. Might you remember that the freedoms granted to you are granted to one and to all, and that together, and only together, we can have true freedom. Go in peace. Amen.